Avery Lane stood on the hot concrete of Falcon Air Base, her boots planted beside the cockpit ladder of the Apache she had spent 2 weeks preparing to fly. She'd arrived early, checked every system, and reviewed the mission plan until it was carved into her memory. Her helmet rested under her arm, and she looked every bit the pilot she had fought hard to become. But then, Major Daniels stepped in front of her with that tone, the one that always carried doubt wrapped in protocol. His words were clipped and controlled, but the message was clear. "Too risky," he said. "If things got too real out there, what if she froze?" Behind him, the other pilots didn't bother hiding their amusement. One of them sipped his coffee. Another gave a short laugh. They stood loose and confident, assuming she'd simply nod and step aside. Avery didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just stood still and stared at her aircraft fully fueled and cleared, knowing she had done everything right. The decision had already been made for her, not by fact, but by assumption. As the others climbed into their birds, the blades started turning, their engines roaring louder than the silence she'd been forced into. Her Apache stayed quiet, not because it couldn't fly, but because someone decided she shouldn't. What none of them knew as they lifted into the dawn sky was that the woman they had just grounded would be the only one left with the power to save them all. Part 1. Who is Avery Lane? Avery Lane wasn't born into the military. She came from a small town tucked deep in the hills of Tennessee, the kind of place where the grocery clerk knows your birthday and the weather decides your plans. Her life started on a dairy farm, where responsibility came early and nobody made excuses for hard work. Before she ever touched a flight manual, she was saving lives in the back of an ambulance. As a paramedic, she had seen pain up close, felt the weight of someone else's heartbeat under her fingers, and made peace with choices measured in seconds. But something kept tugging at her, something bigger than sirens and stretchers. At 30, she walked into a recruiting office with a quiet voice and a steely purpose. She didn't talk about ambition. She talked about service, about wanting to reach people faster, to fly where help was needed when roads ran out. Flight school was brutal, and that was putting it mildly. Out of every 10 who started, more than half washed out. Avery didn't just survive it. She quietly landed near the top of every evaluation and never said a word about it. She didn't come across as impressive at first glance. Her uniform was always clean, but her boots had worn heels. She kept her hair pulled back in a bun so tight it gave her headaches some days. She didn't wear makeup, didn't speak loudly, didn't try to win anyone over. But those who paid attention saw how she studied checklists when no one else was watching, how she stayed late to review flight logs, asking questions that made instructors double-check their own answers. She wasn't flashy. She was thorough. Her peers often overlooked her during training rotations. She never pushed her way into the spotlight, never bragged about her simulator scores. But her instructors noticed the way she handled stress, how she made decisions under pressure without freezing or fumbling. She didn't drink with the others after drills. She went home to call her younger sister, or to read manuals until her eyes ached. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just didn't want to let people down. Avery didn't believe she had something to prove. She believed she had something to give. She carried herself like someone who knew the cost of hesitation and had no intention of wasting a single moment. At 34, she still wrote letters by hand, still sent birthday cards to every niece and nephew back home, still paused to thank the mechanics who kept her aircraft running. Respect wasn't something she demanded. It was something she gave first. What made her different wasn't just her skill, though she had plenty of it. It was the way she moved through a world that often didn't expect much from her, and instead of shouting back, she chose to do the work better than anyone expected. Quietly, relentlessly. By the time she reached Falcon Air Base, she had learned not to expect welcome parties or open arms. She settled in, kept her head down, and told herself that one day someone would notice. But even if they didn't, she'd keep showing up. She'd keep being ready. Because Avery Lane didn't wait for permission to care. She didn't fly to prove she could. She flew because when lives were on the line, she wanted to be the one in the sky doing something about it. Part 2. The Culture of Exclusion. Sub. Part 2.1. The Boys Club. At Falcon Air Base, the pilot roster looked like a fraternity lineup. Every name on the list except one belonged to a man. Avery Lane didn't need to be told she was different. She felt it the moment she walked into the briefing room and saw the pause in conversation, the quick glances that flicked past her. When mission assignments went out, her name was often missing or pushed into support flights no one else wanted. She once found out about a tactical meeting after it had already started. The officer in charge apologized, said it must have been a clerical error, but the same thing happened 2 more times that month. Suggestions she made during prep briefings were either dismissed or ignored completely. If she pointed out a gap in the plan, someone would nod without writing it down. Then later, one of the senior guys would repeat her exact words, and that time, it would be taken seriously. They didn't mock her out loud. This wasn't a movie. It was worse than that. It was polite smiles, quiet exclusions, and a constant undercurrent of doubt. Not strong enough. Too cautious. Not aggressive enough for real combat flying. During drills, she got fewer practice runs and shorter airtime. When she asked for additional sim hours, the scheduler told her the flight deck was full. But a junior pilot with less experience somehow logged extra hours that same week. No one explained why. At lunch, she sat at the edge of the group if she joined them at all. Most of the time, she ate alone or with the maintenance crew. She found more honest conversations in grease-streaked overalls than in flight suits. One time during weapons training, she hit all her targets in record time. Someone clapped lightly and said, "Not bad for a girl who used to drive ambulances." She didn't flinch, just reset the simulation and ran it again faster. Major Daniels never said she didn't belong. He didn't have to. He just kept his tone, even his compliments measured, and his trust somewhere out of reach. If asked, he would have said she was solid. But solid never got the big missions. Every day felt like walking into a room already decided, like being tested not just for what she could do, but for whether she should be there at all. Avery didn't complain. She wrote everything down, studied harder, worked quieter. What they didn't see was how closely she watched their patterns, how carefully she learned every inch of the terrain, every turn of the protocols. They didn't hear the hours she spent running solo checklists in the simulator after lights out. They thought they were ignoring her. In truth, they were teaching her exactly how they operated. And one day all of that silent preparation would matter more than they ever imagined. Sub Part 2.2 Grounded by a Lie. Avery arrived before sunrise, just like she always did. The hangar lights buzzed overhead as she walked her pre-flight inspection with quiet precision. Every switch, every sensor, every line of her checklist was double-checked and signed off. The Apache sat in perfect silence, fueled and ready. She stood beside it in full gear, her helmet under one arm and her flight plan already memorized. This was her moment, the one she had prepared for over months of being sidelined. As the other pilots gathered, she waited near the aircraft, calm but alert. Then an officer approached with a clipboard and a flat tone. He told her her bird was grounded due to a maintenance issue. No one looked at her directly. No one asked for her version. They just nodded like the matter was settled, like she should already know not to push it. She blinked once slowly and glanced back at the machine she'd just cleared from top to bottom. It wasn't the Apache that was broken. It was the trust, the system, the silent wall built around her from the day she arrived. She didn't argue. She didn't fight it. But as she stepped back, letting the others prepare for launch, something in her shifted. They had made sure she wasn't going up today, and they thought that would be the end of it. But Avery Lane wasn't someone who needed permission to be ready. She had always been ready, and deep down, she knew the mission hadn't even started yet. Part 3. The Turning Point. Sub. Part 3.1. The Mayday. The first report came over the radio just before 9. Static filled the room for a moment, then a clipped voice cut through, tight with stress. One bird down in Sector Echo, possible injuries awaiting ground team confirmation. Avery froze mid-step in the hangar, a wrench still in her hand from helping a tech replace a panel. She turned toward the comms unit, her pulse starting to pick up. Another call followed within minutes. A second helicopter had gone down during a low-level maneuver. She moved closer, drawn by instinct. Mechanics stopped what they were doing. Someone turned the volume up. The voice on the channel gave coordinates and injury status, but something about it felt wrong. Too rushed. Too real. More messages followed, each one louder and more urgent. Units were scattering. Calls were overlapping. Some teams were still operating under simulated protocols, unaware the situation had changed. It was no longer a drill. People were hurt. Maybe worse. The base scrambled. Orders clashed. One team called for medevac, another couldn't reach their commander. Signals were crossed, priorities confused. It was the kind of chaos that happened when too many people assumed someone else was in charge. Avery stepped up to the console and asked for clarification. A young operator shrugged his hands, hovering over the controls. They didn't know what to do. Half the Apaches were down, the others were out or unfit to fly. There was no backup plan. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the hangar. There it was. The same Apache they had told her not to touch. The one she'd checked that morning. Its blades still folded. Its belly full of fuel. She scanned the logs again. No faults. No holds. Nothing that would have kept it grounded except for the decision made by someone who didn't believe she was ready. The voices over the radio cracked with desperation now. Coordinates, blood types, requests for airlift. Avery didn't flinch. She didn't need time to think. She already knew. There was no one else available. Not with her training, not with her hours logged, not with that bird still sitting idle. Everyone had been so focused on keeping her grounded. Now she was the only one left who could fly. Subpart 3.2 Unauthorized Liftoff. Avery didn't ask anyone for permission. She walked straight to the Apache and ran through the pre-flight checks one more time, hands steady and quick. The machine was flawless, just like she knew it would be. A young mechanic hovered nearby, uncertain whether to stop her or help. She looked at him once, calm and clear, and he nodded. 5 minutes later, the engines roared to life, blades slicing the air above them in rhythm. She called in on the base frequency, identified herself, declared intent to launch in support of active rescue operations. There was a pause longer than it should have been. Then a voice came back, clipped and tense. Denied. She stayed on the line, repeating her request. She made it formal, just like the protocol required. Again, denied. Return to hangar. Do not launch. She said nothing more. She switched channels and closed her helmet. Inside the cockpit, the hum of systems settled into her bones. Her hands moved without hesitation, confirming weapons load, flight plan, terrain overlays. She pushed the throttle and felt the bird lift nose, rising into the dry Alabama air. The base behind her exploded in static and confusion. Someone tried to reassert the command, but it was already too late. She was airborne, climbing fast, heading north. Ahead of her lay 60 miles of broken desert, low ridgelines, and scattered signals of distress. She flew low and fast, the terrain familiar after months of map work and flight drills. Dust trailed behind her like smoke. In her headset, silence gave way to the first scratchy calls for help. Real voices, real pain. She adjusted her heading. Rules didn't matter now. Not when people were bleeding and stranded and waiting for something to come out of the sky. She wasn't thinking about punishment. She was thinking about lives. Every second in the air confirmed what she already knew. They had grounded the wrong pilot, but she wasn't flying to prove that. She was flying because no one else could. Part 4. The Rescue Sub. Part 4.1. 6 inches from death. The ravine came into view just after a sharp bend in the canyon wall. Smoke marked the spot, rising in uneven columns, black against the blue. Avery dropped altitude quickly, narrowing her focus to the jagged edges below. The downed helicopter had wedged between two rock faces. Its tail was bent, one rotor blade twisted. There was no flat ground, no open space, and no way in without serious risk. She scanned the scene and made her decision before anyone could question it. She radioed her position, called for ground team confirmation, then began the approach. Her eyes flicked between the altimeter, the canyon walls, and the shifting shadows below. There were no second chances in a space like this. The ravine was barely wider than her rotor span. Wind swirled, unpredictable. She could feel the Apache fighting to stay level, each control input requiring precision, 6 inches on either side. That was the margin. As she eased in, the vibration changed. The walls pushed the air back at her, forcing turbulence where there should have been clean flow. The aircraft bucked slightly. She adjusted. Again. Then again. Below her, the rescue team watched with their mouths open. No one expected her to try this. Some looked scared, others just stared. A medic gave a thumbs up and waved in the first casualty, his leg splinted, face pale. She held her hover. Sweat rolled down her back beneath the flight vest. Her fingers never stopped moving tiny corrections to keep the Apache steady. The blades spun like razors in a tunnel. One mistake would shear them off the rock. The crew chief lowered the sling. The first soldier was lifted up, legs shaking, mouth moving in disbelief. His eyes met Avery's through the cockpit glass. He gave a nod barely visible but full of meaning. The second came next. He was unconscious, bleeding through the sleeve of his uniform. The medic secured the harness and sent him up. The wind shifted again. The aircraft dipped. Avery compensated in one motion. 30 seconds more. The rotors hummed against the stone like a knife through bone. The warning lights flickered once, not from damage but from the machine sensing just how tight the space had become. She held the line. With both casualties on board, the crew gave her the signal. She increased lift, gradually coaxing the Apache back into clean air. The tail barely cleared a jagged ledge. The nose tipped. She pulled back, felt the tension release. The helicopter rose into the sky, wounded men aboard, silence filling the ravine behind them. On the comms, someone cursed softly, followed by a stunned voice calling her name. Not a reprimand, not surprise, just awe. Avery didn't respond. She set her course for the medical station and prepared for the next mission. There were more voices calling for help, and now everyone on that frequency knew exactly who to call. Sub Part 4.2, Saving the Commander. The call came in with urgency laced in every syllable. 4 down in a clearing near Grid 29, under simulated fire, no air cover, and the nearest evac bird was 40 minutes out. Avery changed course without hesitation. She adjusted altitude, brought up terrain maps, and armed her weapons system. As she approached, the clearing lit up with bright flashes of simulation fire bursts meant for training, but still enough to disorient and distract. She saw the Apache belonging to Major Daniels lying crooked near the tree line. Smoke curled from the tail. 3 soldiers crouched low near a fallen comrade. One of them was Daniels. His leg was wrapped, his face pale, but he was giving orders through gritted teeth. There was no place to land, not without exposing the entire group to fire. Avery keyed into the squad's frequency and took control. She told them to hold tight and prepare for aerial suppression. She didn't wait for permission. Her chain gun opened up with sharp, controlled bursts. The simulated enemy fire dropped instantly. She didn't overuse force. She used it with purpose. Every shot was calculated to protect, not destroy. The ground team paused in stunned silence. Then they moved. The medics lifted the first casualty. Avery held her hover steady at 20 feet. The sling dropped. The wind kicked up and dust swirled like a storm. One by one, the soldiers were lifted. The crew chief worked fast, strapping them in, giving thumbs up after each lift. Daniels was the last. He looked up at the aircraft, his face unreadable. Avery saw it all from the cockpit. She remembered his voice from that morning, the way he told her combat required something she didn't have. Now she was the only reason he'd leave that clearing alive. The final lift went smoothly. Daniels didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything: regret, respect, and maybe a bit of shame. 3 minutes flat. That's all it took. 4 soldiers up and out, simulated fire still echoing behind them. Avery cleared the zone and set course back to the med station. On the radio there was silence. Then a voice broke in. Someone whispered her name, then called it louder. No orders, no corrections, just acknowledgement. She didn't say anything back. She was already thinking ahead. Where was the next signal? Who else needed her? The man who had doubted her had just been saved by the pilot he tried to ground. And everyone listening knew it. Part 5. The Recognition. The hangar was quiet that evening except for the low whine of cooling engines and the shuffle of boots across concrete. Avery sat on a bench near the edge of the flight line, her helmet beside her and her arms resting on her knees. She wasn't thinking about what she had done. She was thinking about what still needed doing. Inside the operations center, flight paths and comm logs filled the screens. Aides passed tablets back and forth, whispering numbers and matching them with timestamps. General Madeline Greer stood in the center of it all, sharp eyes scanning the data. She had arrived an hour earlier, stepping out of a black SUV marked with 4 stars. Her presence shifted the air around the base. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Everyone knew why she was there. 12 rescued. 3 hours airborne. 8 separate extractions across terrain that was never meant for recovery flights. No prior authorization, no backup crew, no damage to the aircraft, no casualties under her care. Greer turned from the screen and asked to speak with the pilot. They led her outside, where Avery still sat alone, quiet in the fading light. The general walked over slowly, her boots clicking with purpose, her staff falling behind. Avery stood as she approached. She offered a salute, clean and steady, her face unreadable. Greer returned it, then studied her for a moment without speaking. When she finally spoke, her voice carried weight but also warmth. She thanked her for stepping in, then said what she had done was exceptional, not just skilled, not just brave, but something that redefined what people believed was possible under pressure. Others had doubted her. She had heard the whispers. Greer had heard them too, and today they had all been proven wrong. Behind them, a group of pilots stood just outside the hangar, Daniels among them. No one spoke. They had watched the feeds. They had listened to the comms. They knew what she had done. The general turned to them and raised her voice slightly. She told them that the best pilot on that base had not been in the sky when the mission started, but when the mission fell apart, she was the only one who rose to meet it. She said courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like someone standing still while others walked away, and then flying straight into chaos because no one else would. She recommended Avery for the Distinguished Flying Cross, not out of tradition, but because she had earned it in real time under real pressure with real lives on the line. Then she offered her something more, a transfer, not just a new base, a new team, the Night Talons, the elite force, the ones who flew into places no one else would go. Avery nodded once, slow and certain. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The recognition wasn't about celebration. It was about being seen for who she really was. Daniel stepped forward after the general moved on. His uniform was rumpled, one hand still wrapped from the crash. He stopped in front of her, opened his mouth, then closed it. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. He said he had been wrong, not just about her, about a lot of things. She held his gaze and gave a simple reply. She had just done her job. Others came over too, one by one. Some offered words. Others just nodded. No one laughed. No one smirked. The silence between them had shifted into something else. Later that night, Greer led a closed-door debrief. Charts on the wall. Flight data streaming across monitors. When Avery's name came up, there were no qualifiers, no exceptions, just numbers and outcomes and facts that spoke louder than any rumor ever had. The general ended with a reminder. Talent isn't always packaged the way people expect. Excellence doesn't ask for attention. It just shows up when it counts. That day, Avery Lane had not just flown a mission. She had rewritten a standard, and every person in that room knew it. The night air at Fort Carson was cool and clean. It carried the quiet buzz of readiness, the sound of machines being checked and boots moving with purpose. Avery stood next to her Apache clipboard and hand helmet clipped to her vest. 6 months had passed since that morning at Falcon Base, since the day no one expected her to fly, and yet she became the only one who could. Now, with the Night Talons, there were no questions, no sidelong looks, no need to prove anything. She had flown more missions since then, each one different, each one difficult, but none had changed her the way that first unauthorized takeoff had. That one wasn't about tactics or orders. It was about deciding that doing nothing was not an option. She walked slowly around the aircraft, checking the systems like she always did. Her fingers traced bolts and switches with the calm rhythm of someone who knew her tools better than most people knew their own hands. Nothing flashy, just steady. Her new crew respected her not because of what she said, but because of what she had done. They didn't treat her like a surprise. They treated her like a standard. That mattered more than any medal pinned to her chest. The mission briefing had been straightforward. A recovery op in hostile terrain, possible contact, likely low visibility. She listened. She asked the right questions. No one talked over her. No one second-guessed her slot on the flight list. Later, sitting in the cockpit, she ran her final checks. The buttons glowed under her gloves. The systems responded without delay. Her co-pilot asked how she felt. She said calm, because that was true. What she hadn't said but thought about often was how afraid she'd been that day. Not of flying, not of crashing. She was afraid of what would happen if she didn't act, if she let the rules stand between her and the people calling for help. That kind of fear doesn't shout. It settles deep, but it also sharpens your focus when it matters. That day taught her something she carried into every mission since. Courage wasn't a loud moment. It was all the quiet ones that came before it. She hadn't flown to make a point. She had flown because someone had to, because she had prepared in silence for months, because she had been ready before anyone realized they needed her. The blades above her began to spin, the engines whined to life. She fastened her harness and adjusted her comms. Out on the tarmac, the ground crew gave her a signal. It was time. As the aircraft lifted into the dark, her thoughts drifted back one more time, to the look on Major Daniels's face, to the silence in that debriefing room, to the moment she decided her value didn't depend on anyone else's belief. She didn't need recognition to do her job. She didn't need a title to save lives. What she needed was a chance. That day had given her one, and now she was flying not just for herself, but for everyone told they had to wait for approval. If someone asked her now what gave her the strength, she would say this. It was quiet preparation meeting the moment. It was choosing action over fear, and it was knowing that the sky holds a place for anyone willing to rise.